Kennywood's Old Mill is one of the oldest standing dark rides in existence. Originally opening in 1901, this attraction has had several names and themes over the years, but its 2004 update, Garfield's Nightmare, was by far the most polarizing. With its two-dimensional characters, limited animatronics, and emphasis on 3D, many disliked Garfield's Nightmare, instead longing for the days of the previous Old Mill, which had a haunted western theme. At last, the park listened to everyone by bringing in local haunted attraction ScareHouse to give Garfield's Nightmare a much-needed facelift back into the Old Mill. What we have now is an attraction that borrows its theme from previous iterations of the ride, but creates its own original characters and story. When walking up to the Old Mill, you might notice that it seems a lot more open than it was during the Garfield days. The front entrance had a shooting game, refreshment stand, photo booth, and VIP coaster tour booth, so it was difficult for some to see where the ride's entrance was. That's all been fixed now, as the walls that had been built for Garfield have all been taken down. I much prefer this, as it felt like they were trying to fit too much into the space in front of Garfield. The way the entrance is now is nearly identical to the previous Old Mill in 2003, so it looks much more like a classic attraction should. However, if you look closely, the Garfield paw prints are still on the ground. I guess he couldn't be completely erased after all. Rounding the corner into the queue, I took a look up at the window and yep, there's Harold. This window used to have Garfield in it, but I think this is an improvement being that this is an actual figure and not a flat cutout. I do wish they kept the effect of the shutters blowing in the wind. Such a simple effect, but one I greatly appreciated. I guess if anything, it would be really simple for them to bring it back in the future. Once you board your boat, the ride begins. Now, the layout of the ride and the location of the show scenes are exactly the same, as it always has been. Obviously, though, the story and scenes are different, so let's see what we've got here. This new version of the attraction follows this skeleton named Harold, whose name is a reference to hard-headed Harold's horrendously humorous Haunted Hideaway. Yeah, you can tell why they changed it back to just Old Mill in the 90s. The designers would end up taking a lot of inspiration from this previous version of the Old Mill for the new show scenes. I'll be referring to this version as the Haunted Hideaway from here on to avoid confusion. The TV that once welcomed you to Garfield's Nightmare now gives a short introduction to Harold, a skeleton in the Old West. Keep your eyes on him, you never know what he might be up to. In the first show scene, Harold goes to the tailor to get measured up for a new suit. The door from Garfield is still back there, and it still moves once the boat enters the scene. Now, I do want to mention that if you haven't ridden this for yourself, don't judge it entirely based on this footage. It's difficult to film these dark rides as they accurately look, and because of that, what looks like this on video actually looks like this in person. The next scene is the train station, as Harold hops on the side of the engine to go somewhere. The train's whistle blows as the boat passes by, a tribute to the same effect that could be found on the park's Gold Rusher dark ride, which closed in 2008. Next up is one of my two favorite scenes, the blacksmith. Here we find the suspicious coyotes that have been around for a long time. These guys actually have a bit of history. They were originally inside of the Haunted Hideaway, but when that was turned into Garfield's Nightmare, they were moved to Gold Rusher instead. They stayed there for another few years until that ride closed, and for the past decade or so they were used as props during Phantom Fright Nights. It's good to see they've returned to their place of origin. Also of note here is the invisible blacksmith, which is also taken from the Haunted Hideaway. This whole scene is a tribute to the Haunted Hideaway, and as such it's one of my favorites. In the next scene, we see that Harold has set up camp for the night, and he's being tormented by a skunk who continuously moves the clothesline up and down. Now, they did something with this scene that I really like. In the Haunted Hideaway, this scene was part of one large showroom that the boats would pass through twice, so you'd see the same scene from two sides. When it was turned into Garfield's Nightmare, a wall was built in the middle to allow for two different scenes. The Old Mill still has two different scenes in here, but there's an iron gate on the side that you can actually look through to see the other scene and boats passing by. I think this is a great compromise between how the two previous versions handled this room. Now we see that Harold is taking a bath, but that skunk isn't letting him relax too much, and it doesn't smell very pleasant. If you look closely here, you can see a spider moving up and down off the corner of the outhouse. In fact, the corridor leading to the next show scene is covered with spiders. That skunk is just chilling on top of the title card for this scene. I've neglected to mention it until now, but every scene has a title card accompanying it to help tell the story. These title cards are reminiscent of how silent era films were presented, and as such there is no spoken dialogue during the ride. There are some sound effects and music, of course, but the majority of the storytelling here is entirely visual. In the following room we arrive at a cemetery, with Harold riding atop his skeletal horse, spinning a lasso above his head. This is my favorite effect in the entire ride, as the lasso is attached to a ceiling fan, allowing it to continuously rotate above his head. That's clever, and I think it works well and adds to the overall retro feel of this dark ride. Some might think it comes across as cheap, but remember, this is supposed to be a tribute to classic dark rides of the past where effects like this were common, and in that regard, I really like what they did here. Also, you go through the scene pretty fast, but make sure to read a few of the gravestones, as they're all references to past Kennywood attractions. My favorite reading, T. Pike, I'll be back. Is that hinting at something? This is also where you can look through the other side of that iron gate to see Harold's campsite. Next we arrive at the bank, only to realize that Harold has joined up with the skunk to carry out a robbery. He doesn't rob the place with a firearm of any sort, no, he uses the skunk, and the threat of being blasted by the skunk is enough to convince the teller to hand over the cash. You can even see him shaking in fear as you go by. Next is the most elaborate scene in the entire ride. After making his getaway, Harold arrives at a saloon where he gets caught cheating at a game of blackjack. While that's going on, there's a puppet show on the left side, the suspicious coyotes are hanging out, there's a guy playing the piano, and there's a girl dancing on the stage. This scene has so much going on, you almost have to ride it multiple times to see everything. Finally, we see that Harold has been arrested, as he attempts to use his leg to reach the keys on the desk. And hey, that's an orange cat sleeping on the desk. I see what they did there, and these orange cats appear multiple times throughout the ride. The old mill is just full of tributes to past attractions, and I think a lot of people will appreciate it. Will he escape, teases the title card for this scene. Sadly, it doesn't look like it, as Harold is stuck in a pillory, and the skunk is now the one that takes the photo at the end of the ride. The boats pull back into the station, ending a ride on the old mill. Right away, I can see how some people were disappointed by the old mill, especially when compared to Garfield. Although not a lot of people liked Garfield, the 3D is gone and there is less of an emphasis on spoken lines of dialogue. I've also heard complaints that the ride is too dark, which may stem from POVs on YouTube being hard to see. I can confirm that the ride isn't that dark in person, but you guys know that's also the point, right? That's why it's called a dark ride. The one thing I wasn't too happy to see was the continued use of the blacklight effect that was so abundant on Garfield's Nightmare. However, with the lack of 3D glasses and the choice of colors they used, I don't find it as bad. Lots of dark blues, purples, and oranges here, so it's not too bright or anything. And heck, even the Haunted Hideaway had some blacklight in it, so it's not too radical of a change or anything. I would have liked to see the return of the outdoor scenes used on the Haunted Hideaway, but maybe that would have been too difficult to do with the time frame they had available. I could also see any outside scenes not having any moving props, so maybe this was for the best. The boat paths linking each show scene are completely empty of any props or theming, with a few exceptions. The spiders after the outhouse scene and wanted posters after the bank robbery are the only times you'll see anything between show scenes. I think that every connecting tunnel should have something like this to give guests something to look at between scenes. The last criticism I want to address is that the ride is too lighthearted. I've seen it said by everyone. The ride should be scary, the old one was better. Are you guys remembering it right? It was the horrendously humorous Haunted Hideaway, the version this is supposed to be a reimagining of. As someone who got to ride the Haunted Hideaway in its final few years before becoming Garfield's Nightmare, it never was all that scary, and I was 7 at the time. It was just full of spooky scenery to look at as you floated through, and now that the ride has an actual story to go along with it, this is basically Haunted Hideaway 2.0. I understand the criticisms I've mentioned and where most of you are coming from with them, but given the short amount of time they had to transform Garfield into the old mill, I think the park did an admirable job. Remember, this is supposed to be a tribute to classic dark rides, and when compared to something like Waldemere's Wacky Shack or the Knobel's Haunted Mansion, I think this fits in well. I even heard that ScareHouse has plans to continuously add to the attraction as time passes, so this is likely not the final version of the ride. With that in mind, I'm very excited to see what they might add in the future, and for those of you who plan to ride it soon, take it for what it is and enjoy the hard work that went into it. It's good to see the Haunted Hideaway back. I know I missed it. So that's going to do it for my thoughts on Kennywood's Old Mill. Feel free to let me know what you thought of it down in the comments, and I'll try to reply to as many as I can. As always, I appreciate you all for watching, and make sure to check back for more amusement park content here on Rampaging Rex Productions.